Oh, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. This is Jeremy.
This is Pez.
And we are excited to give you a one-off Christmas special Live Alive episode featuring the one and only
John Mark McMillan.
We are super excited. We got to have an interview with him. We're taking a break from Lost Magic, coming back to you in 2019. But for right now, we had an opportunity to interview John Mark, and we want you to take a listen on this pretty amazing interview that we got to have.
So let's take a listen right now.
So my first question is kind of to you, what does a life well lived look like?
A life well lived. So I sort of think that you can almost divide everything in life into two categories, right?
Okay.
And obviously there's some overlap, where things fall into category 1 and category 2 at the same time. But for sort of the sake of the conversation, let's just assume there are two categories, right? Mm-hmm. In category 1, there are things that keep you alive, right? Like, water and oxygen, things like, having a roof over your head, those types of things, things, and that can include things like doctors and lawyers and farmers, right? Mm-hmm. People, they can include people who help you live, who do things for your sustenance. But so there's category 1 and then there's category 2. So category 1 are things that keep you alive, right? Whereas category 2 are things that make staying alive a thing worth doing, okay. Right? Mm-hmm. So like those things include like music, like good tasting food, like conversation with people, yeah. And those are the things that make category 1 worth doing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think too often in life we get stuck in category 1 and we forget that category 2 is actually more important than category 1, and that category 1 only really matters because category 2 exists. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have category 2, then category 1 stops making sense at some point, right? And so for me, a life well lived is a life focused on category 2, the things that make staying alive worth doing, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, that's music, that's art, that's food, and mostly it's people. It's conversations with people. It's enjoying people and knowing people, and even things like art and food and music. Those are still all things, ways I enjoy people, right. And that's why I think I like those things. When you hear like a good song, the reason you like it, I think, is because you at least think that you are experiencing another person through that song. You're having some sort of relationship or fellowship. So I guess to boil it all down, a life well lived is a life lived in fellowship.
Yeah, I like that, man. That's actually really helpful because, something that we kind of explore a lot is, I think what you just said is a universal truth, and it can apply to every single person. And a lot of times with kind of our podcast in particular, we're trying to delineate, like, is there any difference between like a non-Christian life well lived and a Christian life well lived? And I'd be curious to know your take on that, if you have one. Just because.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you didn't. That was it.
Okay. I think that a Christian life well lived. Well, I think first we sort of define what we mean by a Christian life. And so the way I think of, the word Christian is the same way I think of the word musician, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's the IAN, right? It means of the thing, right? So I guess I'm of the music because I play. But it doesn't mean that I'm good. It just means that I am trying to discipline myself in a way to create music. Right. So I'm like of the way of music, right? I'm walking in the way of music. And so to be a Christian, I think it really means to me walking in the way or the discipline, of the Christ, right? So the Christian, the musician, you know what I'm saying? Uh-huh. And so I think that really what it comes down to, I don't think that I don't think that you could separate a Christian life well lived and just a regular life well lived, because I think even a life well lived outside of the Christian way is still probably somewhat of the Christian way. Like forgiveness, is good no matter who you are, right? And it's the Jesus way, even if you don't necessarily know it's the Jesus way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's good to know it's the Jesus way, right?
Right.
But so I have a hard time dropping people into sort of categories of like, I don't know, Christian and non-Christian, believer and non-believer,
Sure.
Maybe it's more like a believer and a pre-believer,
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a good
Like,
word.
So I think it's so I don't know. I guess that's a hard thing to say. But I don't know that it's sort of like you're living a not great life and then all of a sudden you have a conversion experience and you start living a great life. Like
Totally.
I think that the good life is a process, right?
Yeah.
And I think that Jesus walks us through the process of learning how to live the good life, And so maybe I'll say it this way, is that I think Jesus helps us define what a good life is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I would say that, And so I think maybe you can live the good life outside of the Jesus way, but I think you would at least accidentally be walking in some of the Jesus way.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what a good life is. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. It's almost like a life with Jesus is just a deeper life, because you can just dive deeper into the good things because there's more understanding of it. Not that you weren't experiencing it
Yeah, I
before.
think so.
Yeah.
Because Jesus says, God causes the rain to fall and the sun to shine on the just and the unjust.
Right.
Yeah. Sort of we all experience the good life in one way or another, but I think I personally believe the true path to stewarding the good life is the Jesus way.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, speaking of the good life, I pulled up some of your old songs, which I haven't listened to. I haven't listened to the Economy in a long time, and we just played Daylight before you got on here. And those guitar tones on that song, man, that's the good life. That's the good life.
Hey, man, that's definitely category 2.
Yeah.
Guitars.
Yeah.
Guitars. In fact, I love it when guitars are in category 2, and I hate it when guitars slip into category 1.
So speaking of guitars, I was thinking about this
Yeah.
before. As a musician, you're on the stage, you're around other musicians, and you've probably followed music all of your life. If there was a guitar on planet Earth that maybe belonged to somebody, or like a star that you had, is there a guitar that you have in your mind that if you could have that one guitar, it would just make your life category 2?
Oh, man. I mean, I would love to have Jimi Hendrix Strat, right? I'd love to have the white Strat. I'd love to have Springsteen's, oh gosh, it's not a Telecaster, actually. I guess it's not as important to me as I thought, because I can't remember. What is it, a no-caster or I can't remember, but Springsteen's guitar, the one that looks like a Telecaster.
Nice.
JM, this is Jeremy again, your best friend.
Yes.
So a question I have for you, man. I was listening to something on Spotify, and it was, I think, off your Mercury and Lightning album, the last song, Nothing Stands Between Us, and you were talking about it.
It was like commentary.
Yeah, just commentary. And you sounded like a wise sage talking about things. And you were talking about like existential crisis. And
Yes.
yeah, it really kind of hit home, because kind of like I said, the whole theme of this podcast is we're chasing down the abundant life or whatever. And we talk to people that we really want to hear what they say about that. But the second season that we're in, it's called Lost Magic. And really what it is like, okay, how do we actually experience an abundant life at like where we are? And when we
Yeah.
ourselves are looking at Orlando right now, you know, our friends, I'm 33, Jesus year, whatever. Um, we like basically have seen a lot of our friends having, you know, these existential crises and like
Yeah.
questioning faith. And that's really become the theme of this season, where it's like, you know, one part, like people were so excited in the early 20s, or, you know, like even 10 years ago here in the city, that we were like on the verge of a huge revival. It seemed like there was like so many things happening and so many people excited and all this stuff. And now it's like, it's just, it's kind of lost, and people are
Yeah.
all over the place, like from atheist, agnostic, you know, Christian, post-Christian, all that stuff. So my question to you is, well, it's several questions, but one of them is like, how do we deal with our own existential crisis when they come up in our own journey in faith?
Yep. Well, I think a lot about faith, and I've been thinking a lot about what is the nature of faith. You know, what is faith? And I think that at least I was taught that faith, or at least I thought I was taught that faith is subscribing to a list of facts, right? Jesus talks about faith and talks about having faith like children, you know, but I don't think that he means be as gullible as children, right? I don't think that gullibility and faith is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, if he means be as gullible as children, I mean, you can convince children of anything, right?
Yeah.
My kids are still convinced that the elf on the shelf is real and he's magically moving around the house, you know, each night, you know, like, and, you know, so like, I don't think that Jesus is saying be as gullible as children, right? I think that he's saying something else.
Yeah.
You know, I think about my children, and I think about my grandmother before she died. So my kids, you know, they are very smart for their age, you know, but compared to you or I, you know, like they're not smart, you know, like
well,
they don't understand things. Yeah, they might be, but they don't understand things the way we do. Right.
Yeah.
You know, so then my grandmother, she's a very smart lady, very, very intelligent lady. But towards the end of her life, she developed some sort of dementia, where she, you know, she had a hard time remembering who I was. You know, I remember going to a baseball game. She called me by my dad's name, my uncle's name, my cousin's name, and my grandfather's name. You know, and so, you know, like towards the end of her life, she lost, you know, her ability to subscribe to certain facts, right?
Yeah.
You know, so if faith means subscribing to the right set of facts, then does that eliminate my children and my grandmother, you know, and only include the smartest of us, right? You know, so I have to say, when I read Jesus, that feels very counter to his way of thinking, his way of doing things, right? You know, is, you know, blessed are the smart. You know, that doesn't sound like Jesus, right? Blessed are those who, you know, figure it out. You know, those who are intelligent. You know, he's always blessing the poor and the weak and the unintelligent. You know,
Yeah.
And so I'd have to say, so I think faith is not just subscribing to a set of facts, right?
Yeah.
I think that faith has to be something else, right? Something more than that, right? And I promise I'm getting to something here.
Keep going, man.
But what happens when we're taught that faith is subscribing to facts, when all of a sudden your facts are challenged, you can either choose to just sort of decide to believe what you believe because you're comfortable, or you can allow that fact to be challenged, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us grew up and our facts were challenged, and we've reached a point where it's very difficult to defend certain things that we consider to be facts, right?
Right.
And then, and then things change. You learn something, you unlearn something, then you learn something again, right? So I guess my point is that, like, I think that because you're constantly growing and changing, and the way you see the world, perceive the world, understand the world is something that is constantly changing, right? Then faith has to be something more than that,
Yeah.
Otherwise, your faith changes based on, the way you change, right? And so I've sort of decided that I think that faith isn't just subscribing to facts, but faith is more of a practice, right? Faith is more of a practice, what you do with your physical self, right?
Okay.
I think Dallas Willard says that actions reveal, what is it?
You said
actions
Dallas
reveal.
Willard, and we're
You
all
said
getting
Dallas.
excited over here.
We're all
We
like-
knew it. We knew it. We were
We
about
knew
to
it.
ask you.
You're a fan.
Oh man, well, I don't know exactly what he says, but something like actions reveal belief 100% of the time, right?
Wow.
And so I think that for me, I want to cultivate good practices, right? Based around sort of the Jesus way, right?
Wow.
And I think in doing that, so like, I mean, man, if you want me to just get really, really honest, I feel like,
Yeah.
2 days out of every month, I'm probably an agnostic,
Sure.
and then 2 days out of the month, I'm probably like God's best friend in reality. You know what I mean? And then all those other days, it's sort of like I fluctuate in between, right?
Yeah.
But if my practices are good, I can weather both of those storms, the valley and the mountain, right? The shadow of death and the transfiguration.
Yeah.
Like I can live, because I can say that, like, I believe that the Jesus way is good no matter what the outcome is. Like, I obviously believe in the afterlife. I obviously believe in a heaven. I obviously believe in those things, but some days it's harder to believe in those things than others,
Right.
but I think that Jesus, in my opinion, is good now, whether or not there is an afterlife, right?
Yeah.
He's good now, and these practices are good now, and believing helps me both now, and I think it helps me in the afterlife,
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, I don't necessarily need the afterlife to serve Jesus, right? And so, I don't know if that was too heavy.
No,
to drop
that's
that bomb.
real.
But,
Thank you.
No, it gets
You
into
know.
the point of, like, another question I had for you was just how has your faith changed from your 20s to now? And it seems like that's what
Oh,
you're
yeah.
getting into,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, I don't want to backtrack too much, but I had a friend who interviewed Dallas Willard a while ago. And Dallas told him this. He said, if the Jesus way is the good way, follow the Jesus way. He's like, if you find a better way, he's like, follow that way. He's like, but he's so confident that the Jesus way over time is the better way. He was willing, to test that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have a hard time with that. Like, what do you mean? Are you seriously? And there's the scripture, thou shalt not tempt the Lord your God, right? But I don't think that means you just need to blindly throw yourself into something. I
Right.
think that if the Jesus way is the good way, then the Jesus way will prove itself to be the better way.
So,
you
but
know? And
that's
for me, it has.
Yeah.
For me, it definitely has.
yeah.
And
that's our big question. I mean, basically, this whole season of Lost Magic, it's like people are leaving. It seems like, for good, better ways. And I don't know what their original way was that they called Christianity, but it seems like they've left the faith and we're stuck here thinking, well, how do we love our friends who have left the faith? Because the way that they were following, maybe they're thinking a new way is better and they're just testing it out, or maybe the way they were following wasn't actually Jesus' way, so now they're out, in the wilderness again. I don't know. So, like, my last question just on this whole topic, I guess, is how do you love your friends that have left the faith?
Well, I've come to this conclusion that, that the Lord has called me to love them whether or not they ever come back to the faith. You know, and I think the Lord calls us to love our neighbor, and I think that we've convinced ourselves that the best way to love our neighbor is to convert our neighbor. You know, but Jesus doesn't ever ask us to make converts. You know, he asks us to make disciples, and the picture of disciplehood is like apprenticeship. I think that it is a little bit. I've started to feel like it is a little bit weird that I would only love people if they come around to seeing things the way I see it. You know, I obviously think the Jesus way is the better way, and I love it when the people I love want to, walk in the, follow Jesus. Right? I love that, but I think that the true test of a believer is whether if you're able to love people no matter what.
Right.
You know, I mean, even Jesus on the cross, like he asked the Father to forgive the people who, the soldiers who nailed him to the cross, and there's no evidence whether or not those soldiers ever converted, but he loved them anyway. And so that's difficult. I think, man, like I've had several friends walk away from the faith, and I think early on it was like, oh, you're leaving the club, you're rejecting me. You're rejecting the faith I have, and so you must be rejecting me. You're rejecting Jesus, so you must be rejecting us. But so I think I reacted, but I think, but the longer I live, I think the more I realize that it's just good to love people, just to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like without and the better love is the love that doesn't, require anything of them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. To connect some of these ideas, you just mentioned a few minutes ago that 2 days out of the month you are agnostic. You live like agnostic. I really resonate with that because probably this month it's been more than 2 days for me. But just thinking about that idea, and we've talked to a lot of people in Orlando who have gone through a lot. There's been a lot of church trauma in our city. But I do think a lot of it comes back to people don't, and I'm just thinking about this now as you're talking. I think people don't feel like they can struggle. And I think that's what keeps me in the game right now, is having friends and having this understanding of who Jesus is. It's like, okay, I've been out of the game for 8 days now, 8 days straight. I'm struggling. And I think a lot of people in our city and some of our friends have just given up, saying, well, I'm obviously not like Jesus. I can't do this thing. I'm out. And I think maybe what would help those people is what you're talking about, is as if people who are somehow still in the game, not by our own doing, but somehow we're still in it. We still take those people into our homes and love them and have conversations and without an agenda to bring them back to a faith or something like that. But just to be honest about our own strugglings, and that we're not in a good place necessarily just because we're following Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, totally. And
John, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was going to say that it's interesting because this actually brings up the idea of Christmas for me. It's coming around the corner.
It's coming.
I mean, it's like into our weary world, right? Like Jesus entered into our weary cities and our weary neighborhoods, and he came. And so you have a new Christmas album that's come out. And the first song is legit. It's called Baby Son.
We thought you'd come with a crown of gold, a string of pearls, the cashmere robe. We thought you'd clench an iron fist and rain like fire on the politics.
And so we had a really important question to ask about that song, if it's okay.
All right.
The world actually
Yeah.
is begging to know this question.
All our podcast listeners are writing in about this question. The question is that an opera singer or is that you at the end?
That's an opera singer.
Okay.
I wish
cleared that up.
I wish I could do that. That's man.
Well, it kind of sounded like you. There was a part of his voice I was like, that could be John, but I'm not sure.
No, it's a friend of mine. Yeah, he's a trained opera singer, classically trained, and he's a force of nature, man. His voice is unreal. Yeah. But I was thinking I like to do this a lot. It's one of my favorite things to do during production is when there's something's expected, like, okay, we need a guitar solo here. I always like to rethink that. Like, okay, well, let's do something else. It's like, what could we do that would be unexpected, but after you hear it would feel like it belonged there the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And so we tried some things, some solos. There's a bunch of string stuff, so I didn't know that I wanted to do that again. There's strings on it, but I was like, what could we do? We had a theremin, and then I was walking down the hall when we were recording the record. We recorded some of the record at my buddy's college. The college he used to go, and we rented their studio because big studios, it's hard to keep a big studio alive now. So this studio is really awesome because the college funds it, right? Anyway, and I had to go to the bathroom, so I walked down the hall. And as you're walking down the hall, there are all these little practice rooms, it's just the music department. And you hear an oboe, you hear a cello, you hear a piano. And one guy was just wailing opera. And I was like, all right, we need to do something with that on this record. And so we were at that part. And I was like, something has to happen there to bring it up, to bring the dynamic up. And I was telling my wife, I was like, man, I really want an opera singer. And Sarah's like, we have an opera singer at our church. I'm like, really? I was like, who? She's like, well, Johnny Kaufman. And I was like, really?
Oh, dang.
I knew he sang, but I didn't know he was an opera singer. And she showed me a video on Instagram of him singing. I was like, all right, done. We've got to get him on the record. So he came over and tracked his part in my basement, and it was beautiful.
That's awesome. Is it all right if we play a clip of that on the podcast so people can hear what we're talking about?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
One thing I had a question about is, so writing this new album, so it's a Christmas album, but like, what's something you learned about Christmas you never knew? Like, what kind of made you be like, wow, I just never even put that together?
I think that I think I don't think I started writing this record 2013. So it's been a journey. I wrote Baby Son in 2013 and the other song somewhere between then and now. But I think the implications of what it meant for the Christ, the Messiah, to show up and not in a powerful home, not to someone who was influential or someone with a lot of money, not to a king or somebody in authority, but to just this sort of common family, and then not even have a place, and it's sort of almost like the most powerful became the weakest, and then just to see throughout Jesus' life how he avoids power. Every time they want to put him in a position of power, he ducks. He ducks and runs, right? Even in the end, when he returns, he is resurrected, in glory, right? And all of a sudden, the disciples are like, all right, we're going to have a king and we're going to rule everyone and we're going to be in charge. And then Jesus just ascends. He just disappears, right? Yeah. And it's sort of like, what is Jesus saying to us? It's like, what is this narrative? What is God trying to teach us through this story? You know, that Jesus takes the low road every single time.
Yeah.
Every single time Jesus takes the low road. And I thought this is a real important message for us to hear right now when politics are so nasty and everyone is grappling for power, you know, and it's like, you know, everyone's frustrated with, you know, what's happening, you know, in the government. But then now it's almost like the people who are the most frustrated are becoming just as nasty as the people that we hate on the right. And it's sort of like the left and the right on the extreme edges are just becoming so nasty. And they're just sort of this nasty mirror image of one another. And, you know, and it's sort of like, man, what is happening? You know, like what in the world is happening? And then you have Jesus who's sort of like, you know, he could, you know, assert, he could use his authority and become the king of Jerusalem and kill the Romans and sit on the throne and rule with sort of this right-handed power. But instead, he does something mysterious and weird, and he disappears. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so from the beginning, like, and that's just so clear in the Christmas story, you know, like the Jews are waiting for this Messiah to come and be like King David again and destroy their enemies and rule, you know, and the Messiah shows up. And then he's very un-Messiah-like, you know? And so I'm like, what is this saying to me? What does it say of the nature of, you know, the Christian path?
Yeah.
You know, obviously Jesus speaks to politics, right?
Right.
You know, love your neighbor. We have to love our neighbors, you know. But at the same time, he doesn't assume that, you know, earthly power is going to answer our deepest problems, though. You know, he's not looking to the government to save us, right? Not really looking to the government to make things right, even though you sort of have an obligation to have an opinion and to vote and to speak out on certain issues. But, you know, I think we may have put too much of our hope in systems, world systems.
Yeah,
you know.
man. It's
I don't
funny. You describing Jesus' actions as mysterious and weird is like helpful to my soul.
It's refreshing.
This is nice. Like, yeah, it is mysterious and it's super weird in the best way. So a personal question.
I know.
Go ahead.
And I love it. I'll just say it's super weird and mysterious, and I love it.
Me too.
And that's what draws me in, you know.
Yeah. The mystery deepens. So a personal question I had was just about your creative process. Now, you don't have to give away any secrets or whatever, but we have to do some creative things around here. And I know sometimes you just get like strokes of genius just randomly and you write down a song. But if you were to get into a state of creativity to write, record, whatever, what's your process to get into that state?
Yep. So I think Pablo Picasso said that inspiration exists, but it has to find you working.
Okay.
Right. So for me, when I want to start writing, when I'm going into a writing season, I try and write every day for 2 to 3 hours, usually first thing in the morning, because the editor isn't fully awake yet, and you know, so you have this sort of like, the way I see it, you have like the creator and the editor, right? And they like each other, but they don't agree all the time. And a lot of times the editor wants to shut you down and tell you that your ideas are stupid before you have a chance to even explore an idea, right?
Yeah.
And so the editor wakes up when I start checking email, when I start texting, when I start thinking about practical things. The editor wakes up. So if I can get into a creative space before the editor wakes up, then I can create some really weird ideas that usually the best ideas feel really weird at first. And usually the editor would shut them down. So there has to be, you have to be able to be silly, right? I mean, you really do. That sounds so weird, but to write music, you really have to be silly. Like these words and these melodies don't exist. So I've got to like sit down and, you know, and mumble phrases and try and come up with melodies, you know, and that feels really weird. You know, and the editor shuts me down a lot. So sometimes I'll write 3 pages stream of consciousness first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll read before I do the stream of consciousness writing, and I'll find a phrase, and then I'll sort of jump off of that phrase into my writing. And then if it's been a good day and I feel, because a lot of times halfway through, I'll feel the creativity kind of click in. At first, it feels just kind of weird. It like I'm just writing random things.
Yeah.
Then there's a moment when a word or a phrase will just like set me off. And then it's like, things start to rhyme and words start to happen that I've never used before, or, but if I have a good day when it really clicks in, I'll go back and I'll pull phrases from my writing, and then I'll write songs based on those phrases. So for Mercury and Lightning, I did that a lot. I was reading Dylan Thomas poetry. Dylan Thomas is great. He's the guy that Bob Dylan stole his name from, because he was Robert Zimmerman, and he thought that he thought Zimmerman was not going to be a helpful name for him, and so I think there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and so he changed his name to Dylan because he thought it rang better. But that's where he got it from, So he's heavily inspired by Dylan Thomas, and a lot of famous writers are. Yeah. When you read Dylan Thomas, you hear a lot of things that people have stolen over the years. But anyway, I was reading a lot of Dylan Thomas and reading some other poetry. And so it kind of worked its way into my stream of consciousness pages. And then I would start pulling from those pages. And I wrote almost the whole record that way.
Wow.
Just by pulling those ideas out of those pages. I do it differently each time. That's the first time I've done that almost exclusively.
Yeah.
As I've used that in the past, but I used it heavily for Mercury and Lightning.
A personal question for you, kind of in the same vein. Well, also want to say is kind of a similarity of what you just said, was that it's just the creative process is really weird. Weird things happen and you don't understand them.
Yeah.
But it seems like the weird and mysterious is the Jesus way anyway. So I guess that's the right track. Just a kind of a one-off question is, what's the best book you've read this past year?
Oh man, the best book that I've read. I read a book called Cannery Row by Steinbeck.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite books. And it's one of the most lighthearted Steinbeck novels if you've read anything by Steinbeck. He can be pretty heavy. And at first I was like, this is really interesting. This is kind of lighthearted. But even like a lighthearted Steinbeck novel, there's like, 3 suicides and a murder, but he wrote this book about this homeless guys who lived off of Cannery Row in Monterey, California, and the sort of leader of the pack of homeless guys was a guy named Mac, and his best friend was a professor who lived across the street from the place where they slept. And so the whole book is kind of about their relationship, and Mac wants to do something great for his friend the professor, but he doesn't have a whole lot going on, and so every time he tries to do something, he kind of ruins it,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to read that book.
But
I was actually just in Cannery Row this summer. I drove down that little street. Yeah, it is.
A beautiful part of the world.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us, man. We've loved just hanging out with you and getting to know you a little bit more and talking music.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Wow, that was amazing. Jeremy, what was your favorite part?
Probably the part when we became best friends. He's not stopped calling my phone since the interview. John Mark, take it easy. You're on tour in New Zealand right now. It's okay. You'll be back soon. I'll still be here. It's fine. I also love the part where he explained why is my brain slipping? What is it called? Oh, yeah. I also like the part where he explained where this opera singer came from in Baby Son. It's just crazy to think how songs are actually made. They just seem so produced, and yet when you get the behind the scenes story, it's just always fascinating that it just kind of comes together, right?
It's amazing to me how song artists can do that, like both with the lyrics and with the music. Sometimes it starts with music, sometimes it starts with lyrics.
Yeah. And I also love when he was talking about just the way of Jesus being better than any other way. And if there's another way that's better than the way of Jesus, that he's open to following that.
That is the thing I'm taking away from this, because it's a challenge in our culture, but it's also a challenge in my own life,
right?
To actually face the way of Jesus and ask if there really is something better, and if I actually have that in any given moment.
Yeah.
Or if people who are claiming that, they found something else or they're over it with church or something like that.
Right.
What an amazing challenge.
Yeah.
To actually have to posit your own idea against the historical force of Christ.
Yeah. Pez, we're a few days away from Christmas. You hoping for anything from Santa?
Well, I got some Billy Joel tickets from my family already as kind of an early present.
You lucky dog.
I know. Well, the funny thing is, I only know like 3 songs by Billy Joel.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I'm not even sure. Like Uptown Girl, I know that one.
Okay.
We Didn't Start the Fire, which is just funny because he's a white dude. He did start the fire. We all started.
That's our next episode, Uncle Remus. We'll keep it for there.
Yep. But anyways, yeah, I don't know if I'm really want anything for Christmas other than just some time to rest and be with my family.
Yeah, I like that. If Santa is as real as Jesus, then I'm hoping for a Berkey coming down the chimney.
Clean water.
Clean water. Doesn't everyone deserve clean water? So why don't I deserve a Berkey?
You absolutely deserve one, Jerry.
I deserve this. 2019 has been crazy.
Well, I was I wasn't surprised, but I was very happy to discover that there's another Dallas Willard fan out there.
Yeah.
It just never ceases to amaze me. People that have lots of insight into life tend to have read his books.
Yep.
So
tend to be a disciple of Dallas.
Yes.
All right. Well, we wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, enjoy yourself, be safe, and we'll see you in 2019.